So yeah, today's concert, which marks the beginning of our season, it's also a first because what you hear played today, we're going to play next week in York, in the Community Auditorium in York. That's a first thing for us, first time for a main stage concert. We've done holiday concerts up there, but the first time we've taken a main stage concert out of Portsmouth. You know, we prepare it here, we do all of this work just for one concert. So it gives the orchestra an opportunity to play it twice, but it also helps us to reach another audience and expand. So that's also really exciting. So yeah, today we have two pillars of classical music. We have Mozart and we have Bruckner. I'm sure you're all much more familiar with Mozart than you are with Bruckner. So I'll try and say a few words about why I put these two things together. The Mozart Haffner Symphony, it really is, it's a paradigm of the classical style. It is a pillar. It's pieces like that hold up the idea of what the classical style was. And I'll talk about style in a second. And then the Bruckner Fourth is very much in its own way a pillar of the Romantic style in the 19th century. So it's a really interesting way to compare two symphonies from two completely different styles that really epitomize what those styles are. And I think you can't really go on much more talking about these pieces without trying to make some kind of definition of what the classical style is and what the Romantic style is. Generalizations, I'll say that. It's not as if Mozart and Haydn didn't have romantic ideals. They did. They came out in some of their music. But the classical style is typified by structure, form. So the symphony, right? 4 movements. First movement in sonata form, which means you basically present an idea. You present another idea, which is contrasting, and then you spend the rest of the first movement trying to bring those two things together. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, in a very, very basic way. And yes, it's by form, it's also about linear progression. It's about reaching destinations in music. Right? That sort of gesture that drives you towards a destination point. And about clarity and efficiency. And that kind of sums up, in a very broad nutshell, what the classical style was. They invented it. Haydn invented it. He wrote 105 symphonies, right? So Mozart, 41 symphonies. So they invented this style. They wouldn't have known what the classical style was, by the way, because they invented it. But that's what we now call the classical style. Romantic 19th century. Yeah, Romanticism. It's not really about Valentine's Day. It's not that kind of romance that we're talking about, a romantic idea. It's the idea of the individual. And this really starts with Beethoven. And the idea of the individual existing in the world and the individual's relationship with the world, especially nature, and the expression of emotion. And that really is the distinction between these two styles, right? Classical and romantic. The Haffner Symphony began life as not a symphony, began life as a serenade. And here's a distinction between these two composers, which I think is really interesting. Mozart was a genius, an inspirational, cocky young man who wrote pieces in the middle of the night, threw them, off to the orchestra in the morning, and they got played. And it was that kind of ferocious, fiery creation, inspired directly from above. That's the idea we have in our mind when we think of Mozart. Bruckner, very much the other side. He doubted himself constantly and was always tinkering and changing and editing. This is best typified in how these two pieces got created. So the Haffner started life as a serenade. It was written for a friend of the family in Salzburg. This friend was being ennobled and they wanted some music to be played for that, so they asked Mozart to do it. And Mozart was really busy at the time. he was writing his opera, The Abduction of Seraglio. He was actually getting married as well. He had a lot of stuff going on in his life. And his father really, really wanted him to write this. So he threw it together, but it arrived 2 days late. And his dad wasn't terribly happy with that. And that was back in 1776. Then in 1782, he had this idea of, I want that music back, because I think I'll write a symphony with it. So he asked his dad to send it back. And I think it took his dad 2 months to send it to him, because I think his dad was actually pretty peeved that, that he'd embarrassed him. But he eventually sent the music back. And Mozart got the music back, and he was working through it, and he was shocked. He wrote this, he says, I'm shocked about how great this music is. I had forgotten every note. Right? That's Mozart. Like he was just in such a flurry of activity that he'd written this piece, he didn't even remember it. He came back and he said, oh, wow, this is really good. So he formed a symphony out of that, which we now call the Haffner Symphony. I'll talk about the actual music, but that idea that, he forgot every note. Oh my God, this is not Bruckner. Bruckner wrote the Fourth Symphony in a span between 1874 and 1888. Yeah, that's right, 14 years it took the guy to come. And even then, at the end, and this is what we call the Bruckner problem. He was so self-doubting, and he kept changing things so much, and he kept trusting other people's opinions and changing stuff, that there are considered to be 3 official versions of this piece. There are also 14 different variants of it. So what do you play? Like, what do we actually play on the stage? And there's an accepted version, which was by a musicologist called Haas, and he decided this has to be the version that Bruckner intended. But we still don't really know, because there's all these other versions going on. Orchestra's now playing a piece that we're going to play today, that's pretty standard. But that's the contrast, right? You have Mozart, this genius wunderkind who just dashes off pieces and doesn't even remember he wrote them. And then you have Bruckner who just tortures himself for 14 years trying to create the perfect work. And you got to remember, Bruckner was an organist and a devout Catholic, and he spent most of his life as an organist in a monastery. So you can imagine what kind of man he was. He was very humble, never really wanted adulation. In fact, the famous conductor Hans von Bülow said that he was half genius and half simpleton. That's how he described it. And I don't think that was intended to be critical. I think it was almost like the humility of a man. So that's really I suppose the difference between these two. And Bruckner did call this the romantic. And here I have to make a little detour, maybe 1 or 2 detours into romantic 19th century music. You probably know that there were kind of 2 schools of thought going on, right? There was a war between those who believed that music was absolute, like basically it didn't mean anything beyond what you heard. It was purely about logic and aesthetic and structure. That was Brahms, best typified by Brahms, okay? And then the other side, you have the program music people, and program music was that music was about something else. It was extra musical. So you have people like Berlioz, who wrote Symphonie Fantastique, and of course you had Richard Wagner, who was very much the exponent of the other side of that figurehead, right? So there were at least two very different points of view about what music was in the 19th century. And Bruckner was kind of in between. Bruckner's influence, being an organist and a choir master, his influences were Bach, Palestrina, Schubert, Wagner, Brahms also, and then this kind of Mahler thing as well. His relationship with Mahler was really interesting towards the end of his life. So he was kind of crossing. I don't think he really cared about this argument. And there's a story. I'll tell you a brief story. He had his followers, right? Little devotees, all these students who would follow him around. And then Brahms had his, right? And they were both in Vienna at the time. And the students thought they'd play a prank on both of them and get them both to show up at the same tavern one night and see what happened, right? Put Brahms together with Bruckner and see what happens. So they did this. They thought it was going to be fireworks and one of those nights for the ages. Apparently Brahms and Bruckner just talked about beer and sausages all night. So that's what they had in common, I suppose. Yeah, so this idea of romantic, he had an idea of a program in it, which we'll talk about when we get to the actual symphony. So he had an idea of things that were extra musical that were in it. But just a slightly more aside, this idea of labeling pieces, because obviously Haffner, romantic symphony, you know, it's not like Symphony Number 35 and Symphony Number 4, which they are. But we know them as the Haffner Symphony and the Romantic Symphony. And there's something about that, right? That's marketing. That's marketing 101, which has been going on for years, hundreds of years in classical music. And I'm going to give you a really stark example of this. And I use this kind of frequently, but if you haven't heard this story, it's kind of stunning. I'll play you a little bit of it, and you'll know exactly what the piece is, and then I'll talk a little bit about it. What comes to mind? Side of my face. Where's the other side? Alright, so that's what we know as the Moonlight Sonata, written in 1801. Beethoven would have no idea what we mean if you said Moonlight Sonata. If he came here today and he says, "Oh, I love your Moonlight Sonata," he'd be like, "What?" Yeah. Moonlight Sonata was given the title Moonlight by a guy called Relshab in 1832, which is after Beethoven's death, because he thought, oh yeah, it just reminds me of the moonlight coming through stream. And in fact, in German it's called Mondschein, which is moonshine. And in fact, I think if it had been called the Moonshine Sonata, it might have even sold more. But it's the Moonlight Sonata, and it was a marketing ploy. And you know, one of the terrible things about doing that is that we now have that image of moonlight, and therefore that's the way we hear it played all the time. Yeah. It's actually wrong. Oh, no. Yeah. So here, right? Think of the beats of the bar, 10, right? I'll count it. If it was in 4/4 or common time, that's what it would be. You look at the score, and it's got a C on it. So if you've ever seen music that's got a C as the time signature, it basically means 4/4. It's common time. If you see a C with a line through it, it's called cut common time, which means the beats of the bar are not 4, but 2. So if you play this as cut common time, it comes out as this. No moonlight. because what he wrote at the top of that piece was quasi una fantasia, as a fantasy. He didn't write Moonlight, and he wrote it in time, but because we now have this idea of Moonlight, there's no way you can play it at that speed. Right? So everyone now plays it the way we hear it. Yeah. Right, that's just a little side, sorry, but that's about the power of marketing music, and it's been going on for 4 centuries. Here's another one, Appalachian Spring. It was never called Appalachian Spring, it was called Ballet for Martha. And then Martha Graham, it was the Martha Graham dance company. She decided that she'd call it Appalachian Spring after it was written. And now everyone's like, oh my god, I can just feel the spring. And someone actually said that to Copeland after performance, and he was like, okay, first of all, it was Ballet for Martha, but secondly, the spring we're talking about is a wellspring. Not the season, but okay. So, what's in a name? That's an important thing. So that's a little side. Okay, so we've kind of set the scene for these 2 pieces. Now let's talk a little about what they are. Mozart. Yeah. It's hard to think of Mozart without thinking of opera. I would go as far as to say that all Mozart is opera. That's what his heart. He was born to present drama. His operas are the greatest operas, right? Marriage of Figaro, Magic Flute, Idomeneo, Così fan tutte, Seraglio. This is where he felt most at home, actually. And everything he wrote was related to that, and it kind of fits into what this classical style is. So the beginning of the Haffner Symphony is like this. That opening, that's just a fanfare, right? Sets the scene, stage opens, everyone appears, right? And then suddenly you get this. So what appears are 2 characters. Or maybe 1 character, he comes out, so you got the thing, and then there's a little side, and if you see Mozart operas, you'll see this happening. There's always someone kind of around your corner going, and that's kind of what's happening in the music. Is that dum, 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 da, oh, but dum, 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 da, and now you go on, and then everyone's back, right? So you've got a dramatic scene that's being painted up. That's been played. And that's really the core of Mozart's classicism. It's always a play. It's always a play. It's always a drama. And you've got to think of the characters that are interacting. And you'll hear them, you hear the little oboes going, then presume, right? It's like soprano and the bass interacting. And there's a lot of humor in it. So always take it with a little bit of a pinch of salt, and think about who's saying what, and what are those words? What are the words that you would put in if you were putting in words? What would they actually be? And that's the core of Mozart's music, and you'll find it throughout this piece. It's not a terribly long piece, but it just typifies that idea. That's why it shows it, because it really typifies that idea. There's also this big octave, and that octave thing appears in Bruckner as well, but in a very different way. You know, how you use an octave in a very different style. So that's really the Mozart. And the last movement, well, that's what you'll hear it. You don't have to play this through, you'll hear all these ideas. It's pretty straightforward. The last movement is marked presto, and Mozart wrote it should be played as fast as humanly possible. So we've been trying to do that, and we'll see what happens. Either I win or the orchestra wins. No, it's usually the orchestra, but I won't let on if that's what happens. But it's as fast as humanly possible. So it's a great piece, and it's about 20 minutes long. That's the first half, and I'll send you out here out in the lobby smiling, hopefully. And then that takes us to Bruckner. So Bruckner is it's a different kettle of fish. As I say, it took 14 years to kind of even to get to the last final version. And that's not even a version we're playing. We're playing a version from 1880. So it rumbled on. But 1888, notable in that it's also the same year that Mahler wrote his first symphony. We did that last season, Mahler 1. And this is a contemporary of it. And there's a lot of similarities, but really they are very different. Bruckner's interested in these big blocks of sound. It's sound architecture. It's like a cathedral of sound. It's almost like it's been described as you walk into a huge Gothic cathedral, medieval cathedral, and you're walking around just taking in the awe of everything there in its detail and in its enormity. And that's kind of the journey that you're on. It's not a story, but it's that kind of just being in something that big and that much bigger than you. That's Bruckner's humility. It comes from his religious beliefs, but he makes that part of his musical style. So it begins with a horn. I've got to say, I've been in love with this piece for 40 years. I've never conducted it. I played first horn in it once, which was a great privilege. But Bruckner has had a bumpy ride. Back in the 80s and 90s, a lot of people played Bruckner. It was very popular. Kind of went out of favor. And I've been speaking to a lot of the orchestra members, and they've never played this piece. And this used to be one of the most played pieces, Bruckner 4, the Romantic. And it just isn't really played anymore. And I think that's really unfair because it's an extraordinary piece. It's glorious, and it's so beautiful, and it incorporates such tenderness and then grand statements. There's nothing quite like it. There really isn't. So it opens with the fanfare in the horn. But it also opens with a little shimmering going on in the strings. So what this is meant to represent is a horn calling from a tower in a medieval city at the beginning of the day, wakening up the whole city, and the gates open and the great knights go out into the forest, right? So it's got, the airs are very romantic idea, right? But that's kind of the idea. But it opens with this rustling in strings, and it's impossible to do on a keyboard, but it's something like this. Really quiet, and it's just tremolo, right? So when you take your bow, and instead of just playing note by note, you're just kind of creating this shaking effect. You know, it's almost like a nervous twitch, but it's this shaking effect. And I would say that most string players hate doing this. I think at the very quiet dynamics, they don't mind doing it. It's when they have to go, which happens a lot in this piece. I'm going to get a chiropractic bill tomorrow from a lot of them, but that's their own little personal experience of this. But that's how it is, and then you have the horn go. So you'll hear that horn call go back over and which is just a natural hunting horn. So again, it's about nature, it's about something. And this movement goes between this and then there's a second subject which he plays. And I found out only recently what he actually has there's a bird he had in mind. It's a bird called the Great Tit. I don't know what it is in German. I think I do actually. I think I wrote because it's very funny. It's the Zuzi Bay. Zuzi Bay. That's the bird, right? It's the second subject. It's this. It's just a little bird call, right? He just chucks that in. I just found that out recently. Oh, so he's using bird calls. So it's kind of what Mahler would do too, but in a different way. Mahler would just kind of do that, and then he'd bring this kind of human being back more into it. Bruckner's just interested in these grand landscapes, and not so much humans' place in nature, and it's about humans' place in the grand scheme of things, right? And there's a deity, and we're humble in the face of that, and that's more of the idea that's behind it. Second movement it's a prayer, but I think it's very akin to maybe some of the funeral marches that we hear. Sometimes, you've got this in Mahler 1. So that's the Mahler 1 funeral march, which is actually, of course, tongue-in-cheek because it's the march of the hunter who has died, the funeral march of the hunter who has died, and the pallbearers are the animals of the forest, who he's trying to be killed, right? He's trying to kill them, and now they're oh, the hunter's dead. Oh. So it's very sardonic. That's not quite what Bruckner is at, but here's Bruckner's prayer funeral march. Surprising moments like that. That color just suddenly changes color, but it's a much more sincere version. And in fact, just after that, it gets taken over by the winds, and you get the. So you get that drum beat. That kind of relates it to the Mahler. It also gives you like the Beethoven 3 funeral march, but it's a very, very sincere piece. I don't think he had any irony in mind whatsoever. This is a prayer from a man who's very devout, and that's what it's about. Third movement is a hunter scene. So it begins very quickly, and the horns, and it's really energetic, and it's got lots of horn calls in it. What I think is one of the cutest moments of the entire thing is at the end of the. So it's a scherzo, and then there's a trio. So scherzo is all about that hunting thing, and then there's this trio at the end. And let me see again. Yeah, this is actually meant to represent the hunters having lunch under a tree. So think about that. and it's all like just a quiet moment under the tree, having a picnic, and then they go back to the hunt, right? Because the scherzo comes back. A, B, A. 3 parts, comes back, right? So that's your third movement. Then the fourth movement. And this really is the beast of it all. And one of the most, there's a couple of striking things that come out of this movement for me. The first is the use of unison across the orchestra. It's a rare thing to happen, but he makes everyone play the same notes at the same time. And it's very effective. It's like this. There's an introduction that builds up, and then we finally get to hear. It's a real declamation, it's a real statement. And he uses this a lot in the brass. And I've been wondering why. I mean, there's a lot of big brass moments in this piece. But normally composers like Mahler or Sibelius or Tchaikovsky would use the brass with chords, right? Like big chords, like a chorale, like lots of notes together, right? Harmony. Here he uses them like this. They're just in unison. Not just in unison, in octaves. And I've been wondering, well, what's that about? I think what it is he was an organist. So you got to know a little bit about the organ. So here's a little bit about the organ. They have these stops, right? You know what an organ looks like? You've got like keyboards with like 3 or 4 of them, and they all do different. They all are related to different sets of pipes. And you pull out a stop, and you activate that pipe, and you push a button, which is a key, and it sends air to the pipe, and it plays, right? So there's all kinds of different stops you can pull, but one of the simplest ones is called the 8-foot stop. So if you have a trumpet playing on an 8-foot stop, that's basically what you play is what you get. So you play that note, that's the note you hear. If you pull out a 4-foot stop, you play that note, that's the note you hear. It's an octave above. If you pull out a 16 stop, like a trombone, the note you get, instead of playing that, you get that. And in fact, you go another to 32, right? It's all just divisions, halves. It plays that. So if you pull all of the stops out and you play this all at the same time, that's what you're getting. You're getting all those octaves playing exactly the same thing. Sounding like this. So you're getting that organ effect. I think that's where it comes from. It is very, very effective. No one else, I don't think there's anyone else writes like that, but it's very powerful. The other thing that really strikes me about this piece is, and this really hits to the heart of Bruckner. I came to Bruckner from, I was a chorister in a cathedral choir, and I sang a lot of Bruckner's motets. And they're absolutely beautiful. If you don't know them, they're really spectacular little miniature pieces. And I sang them all. And the things that really struck me about those was his use of harmony. You know, it would almost sound like Palestrina, but using Wagnerian harmony. Really, that's just so striking. And really, that's the genius. One of the real geniuses of Bruckner, and combining it also with Bach, the counterpoint. But here at the very end, I think this really shows the harmonic progression, because we have this wonderful build-up at the very end of the piece, and it feels like a pilgrim has reached the end of the Santiago, the Camino de Santiago, right? And they finally reached the cathedral, and they're climbing the steps up to the top to finally reach that moment. And it has that kind of ecstatic humility to it. And these are the chords he uses, and it really is just sublime. I think it's just ecstasy is the word. In the true chant is what it is. just is that monumental journey to the top. The gratis Parnassum, right? The steps to paradise. And the way he does it is incredible. And there's a bit more spice that goes into it, which I think you can add. So there's a little bit of violin, adding that intensity to it as well. It's just a moment of sheer genius and ecstasy. And that's how he ends it. And it really is. It's just a glorious, glorious, glorious ending. And I promise you, if we do our job right, you're going to leave here today feeling a lot better about life than when you came in. And that's what this piece is about. Okay. So thank you all so much for being here. Please enjoy it. Also, for not subscribing if you haven't to the season, we have a lot of great stuff coming up. Your support is what keeps this whole thing going. So thank you again for showing up and enjoy the concert. Thank you.